and find relaxation and find community. To me, my team is my community. We volunteer locally, we organize river cleanups through solve.org, and we act as stewards of the river where we practice, clearing trash, assisting boaters in distress, etc. These actions make space for responsible communal use of the Willamette River. Today, we ask for mutual enforced respect from motor-assisted watercraft, because we are the pedestrians as paddlers, and we want to feel safe. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning. Cindy Hickman, Wasabi Paddling Club. There really isn't much I could add to that eloquence. I also am a steersperson for Wasabi with over 22 years experience on our Willamette River. It is our home. We love it. We spend a lot of time on that river. And the idea that we have to come here before all y'all and plead for enforcement that has already been established, to support rules that have already been established and regulations that have already established is really frustrating. It is terrifying to be on one of these dragon boats while these wakeboarders are in the water. And because there's not much I can add to what has already been said, I would personally like to invite each and every one of you and the visitors or the commissioners that are on video to come down and be physically in a dragon boat. Come out to practice. You can reach me through the information that I provided, and we will get you on a dragon boat with a paddle in your hand, and you can sit on the same level that we sit and experience what that's like. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Lightning. I represent Lightning Super Justice Lab X. Now, living on the river for over 12 years and owning Columbia River Marina at the time, what the group in here is going to understand is just how incompetent Multnomah County River Patrol is. They're absolutely incompetent. They don't know what they're doing. And all the people in this room, you should say that out loud. They're not doing the job that you want them to do. And the reality is, I own the river up there, and I used to complain all the time about different things. They were running a pipe from the airport underneath out into the water, and I was complaining about that. I was complaining about different things where they had boat lifts, which was part of Port of Portland, was crumbling. And I complained about that, and what they ended up doing is try to set me up twice and also have 4 people come down into my marina to pretty much eliminate me. They are corrupt. They're not going to do you anything. They shouldn't be out on the rivers. They shouldn't be on the waterways. I would highly recommend you get the Coast Guard involved. They are professionals. They know what they're doing. They do outstanding work on the waterways. River Patrol is a parody. They're a joke. They should never be out on these waterways. Now, powerboat industry versus the dragon boat industry. Who's going to win? You already know dragon boats. There's a lot of money backing these people, and plain and simple, you've got a real fight for what you want. And I agree with the no wake zones. I had my signs posted on my floating home 750 feet out on the water. So I understand what you want and what you need. Now, getting to the presidential election, my opinion is Joe Biden's worst mistake in history was getting Elon Musk mad. When he went over to the Republican Party, when he bought Twitter, turned it into X, we're going to see something happen here that we've never seen before. Whoever Elon Musk wants for president of the United States will become the president of the United States. You can't stop him. He will win. Whoever he picks, whoever he chooses, whoever he wants, he will win. In the words that the people are going to be saying at the end of this election, the Republican Party was moving like a machine. Like a machine. Elon Musk is the Secretariat of Entrepreneurship, of building companies, and he will win. The biggest mistake President Joe Biden ever made is getting Elon Musk mad. Too bad, Joe. You lose. You're not in it to win it. Enjoy your retirement.
Thank you.
Next, we have Ann Powers, Betty Noyce, Jen Wilkins, and Dinah Gilbert.
Good morning. You can begin.
Okay, hi. I'm Ann Powers, and I'm a new paddler with Wasabi Dragon Boats. What I want to focus on is what you can do. Obviously, we have a problem. I'm not completely clear on the parameters of your authority or your budget. I assume there's some limitations on both. So minimally, I would like to propose that one of you, maybe several of you, take this on as an issue that you want to look into, that you want to pursue, that you want to champion. And let's figure out what you can realistically do to help us out here. We know we need more patrolling. I've been on the river only 2 years, but I don't think I've ever seen a patrol boat. There's not enough patrolling. And you don't have to patrol 24/7. We're only out there Monday through Thursday in the evenings and Saturday and Sunday morning. So we don't need a huge budget increase for the patrol. We just need key times covered. Signage also clearly inadequate. Education of the wakeboarders inadequate. And then actually patrolling and ticketing people who are violated. Those seem like three not hugely expensive things that maybe you could help facilitate and do for us. I, of course, have more grandiose ideas of what you could do, putting those like cameras on the bridge like they have on some of the streets where you can do 24/7 monitoring and ticketing with snapshots. But I understand that might not be on your budget, but certainly there's something you could do to help us out. So please reach out to us, to Wasabi. There's so many people that paddle, so many different clubs here. I'm sure we're all very interested in having follow-up with you and seeing what you can do to help move things forward. And I look forward to seeing future action, and maybe this will be an agenda item in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Jen Wilkin. I'm part of the coaching staff from Wasabi Paddling Club. I coach our team of developmentally disabled athletes, the Wasabi Special Dragons. I've had the privilege of coaching them for the past 6 years, but they have been a team for more than 25. I'm here today because I am deeply frustrated, angry, and disappointed in how our river is being mishandled, especially regarding the increase in dangerous wakeboat activity and the lack of enforcement. The Wasabi Special Dragons only paddle during Rose Festival season because the larger Kaohsiung boats we use then are more stable. Coaching the Special Dragons has been one of the greatest joys of my life. Providing access and opportunity to people who otherwise wouldn't be able to participate brings me so much happiness. I wish I could extend their season. I wish it was safe enough to do that. Many of those athletes want to paddle in standard dragon boats year-round. I was so excited for the Special Dragons to participate in our Club Fun Day. That event was a rare opportunity for our entire club to come together, to mingle, to have fun. And given that the Special Dragons don't paddle year-round, that was rare. We had planned every detail carefully to ensure they could safely participate along with the rest of the club. Unfortunately, that day turned into a disaster. Despite our precautions, our standard dragon boats were swamped and capsized by huge wakes caused by a wake boat, and we were thrown into the water. 7 Special Dragons were on the water during this incident. The chaos and the danger were overwhelming. Thank goodness the capsize happened so close to Poets Beach, made it easier for us to swim them back and forth. Thank God it was warm that day. I'm so sad that those Special Dragons experienced that, and for my fellow paddlers who've been traumatized by these incidents. I'm afraid that some of them might decide that paddling's too scary and never return to the water. The river's now a battleground of wake boats creating hazardous conditions. Their massive wakes and the turbulence have turned our river into a dangerous place. making it impossible to extend the Special Dragons paddling season safely into the summer months. This isn't just an inconvenience, it's a serious safety issue. The Special Dragons have been part of Wasabi Paddling Club for over 25 years, and they used to paddle safely beyond Rose Festival season. Now it's simply too dangerous. But this isn't just about our team. It's about the broader community. The lack of enforcement is jeopardizing the safety and enjoyment of all human-powered craft on the water. As someone who paddles on this river many days a week year-round, I'm also personally affected by the dangerous wakeboat activity. The river's vast and there's plenty of areas for these boats to have their fun without endangering others. I'm not asking for new laws. I'm just insisting that the existing rules get enforced. Portland's a beautiful city and our river is a precious resource. The lack of enforcement has allowed reckless behavior to turn our river into a risky environment. This needs to change immediately. We need more vigilant enforcement to protect all river users and ensure that everyone can safely enjoy the river throughout the summer. The fact that our disabled community members cannot access the river, it's not fair. It's not inclusive. It's not Portland.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Betty Noyes, and I, first of all, want to begin with thanking you as individual members of the community for serving on this commission. I'm relatively new to the city of Portland, so I looked up what your mission was and what your responsibilities are. And I was delighted to see that I think this group is in the right place at the right time, because your charter calls for leadership to ensure quality service, prioritize the needs of the most vulnerable, and promote health, safety, and a prosperous community. So with those in mind, I address you as a new citizen of Portland today. I'm very proud to be a nurse. I'm very proud to have been a member of the Golden Dragons paddling boats. And I would like to also share with you, in case you don't know, the magnitude or the size of these boats that we're really talking about. They're 50 feet long, okay, but only approximately 4 feet wide. And they're very shallow, and they're very tippy. And it is something that requires skill and talent, and it is not an easy feat to be a dragon boat paddler. I've done it for a year, and I just have a tremendous respect for its skill. So here we are on the great river of the Willamette, and we are faced with this increasing danger of wakeboat motorists, I think is probably the best word. They're dangerous, they're predatory, and they need to be stopped. And I don't pretend to know the way of suggesting to you that you stop them, other than what has been mentioned sort of calmly, and that is more signs and more patrols, and that seems very, very easy, but obviously it's not, because you, with your mission and vision and values, would have already done that. So I don't understand what the impediments are. But I do, and I am here today to stress with you, there is an absolute need for safety. It is part of your mission, and I implore you to find ways, to find resources, to engage those of us who are paddlers and those of us who are concerned citizens, to stop this illegal, immoral, and indecent behavior of these wake boats. So thank you very much again for your service to the community, and thank you very much for hearing us today. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Dinah Gilbert. I am the coach for the Rip City Paddlers. I have been a part of the dragon boating community for 20 plus years. In 2019, my boat was swamped by 2 motorized craft that went past us far too close, total disregard. We're not even sure that they even saw us. We certainly saw them. We didn't stand a chance. We ended up in the water, swimming people back and forth, gathering all of our things. It was pretty terrifying. To hear that 4 boats in a matter of 9 days also went in the water really greatly upsets me. As dragon boaters, we are all hyper aware of what the rules are. Why are the motorized craft not aware of what the rules are, or even looking around for us who are human-powered watercraft? There are rules in place, we know that, but we need enforcement. So I'm just here to support our dragon boat community. Please help us out there. Summertime is my favorite time to be on the river. It's also my least favorite time to be on the river because I know what we're up against. So help us out. Thank you.
Thank you.
This is our last group. It's Kari Stoltzberg, Carol Fishback, Nathan Jacobson, and Erica Gibson.
Good morning. You can go ahead and begin.
Oh, hi, I'm Erica Gibson. I am coach and tiller for the Rose City Renegade Dragons, and I have been in the dragon boat community for the last 10 years. And as you can see, when the dragon boaters come out, we do it in full force. And I'm also here to discuss the water safety matter. As a tiller and a coach, like Frankie said, there's an added sense of concern for your team. When you learn to till, you are taught that you are responsible for the safety of that entire boat, which means you're responsible for 21 people and yourself. Wasabi has a whole team of special dragons, and many other teams have people who are visually impaired or who have issues being in water. I have people who don't know how to swim, which sounds crazy, but you don't expect to go in the water in a dragon boat. We have wider boats than most other teams because of the nature of our river. We anticipate sharing it with wake boaters. That being said, they should anticipate sharing it with us. We clear the rivers. We are taught to go to the side. We stay on the side of that river to ensure that if we were to capsize, we can swim to shore and bail our boats. They come within 20, 30, 40, 50 feet of us and can't even acknowledge our presence. It is dangerous. It is terrifying. I have been tilling for the last 7 years, and the last 2 of them have probably been the scariest on the water for me. As a tiller trying to keep that boat safe, we have to stop our practices. We have to brace our boats to make sure we don't flip, to make sure we don't swamp, to make sure we don't capsize. We're happy to share the river. We love to share the river. We're aware that it's a resource that we all want to use, especially in the heat of a Portland summer. But we want to share it responsibly and safely with everyone around us. When you go through tiller training, you're taught to know the points on the water where you can get off. I don't understand why those driving wake boats aren't taught safety for those who are human powered. I can't slap a motor on the back of my boat. I can't steer with a steering wheel. I am human powered and human driven and human tilled. I just request that we look for more safety on the water. Thank you guys for your time.
Thank you. Good morning.
Hello, my name is Carol Fishback. I'm 64. I am a proud member of Wasabi Burn since 2018. As a newcomer to Oregon from a landlocked state, back then I was delighted to find a community as inclusive and diverse as the Dragon Boat community. I've always considered myself an average swimmer, but to be able to do this sort of thing with other people of all ages, and the special dragons especially, it gave me a huge, warm reception or impression of Portland. And I'm still proud of the fact that they are hanging in there, but I worry how long they will be after the incidents that I've seen. The first time I was in a boat that capsized a couple years ago, I distinctly remember it being a nice sunny Saturday morning by Ross Island. There was nothing but SUPs and kayaks and us. And we heard the sound of a motor, and as he went flying by this boat, he was literally pointing like one would on a pool table where he was going to weave in and out. And we were over in minutes. There's a lot of things that a dragon boat can do. You've heard the dimensions, but we only have so much time to be able to turn into a wake and ride it. And to watch from my seat at that time, my entire boat turn over, it was sickening. It was very scary. I had never been anything like that before. Fortunately, we had some safety training. I do want to add that as somebody who is in the workers' compensation field for a living, and I'm very familiar with how OSHA works for the safety of those workers. I had an incident a couple years ago where I took care, one of my claims was the gentleman who lost his life in the field from heat exhaustion. And I was really impressed with what OSHA did. they made an immediate temporary law to protect those people that were going to be continuing to go out there. It may seem like apples and oranges, but I just feel like with the agencies that we have, I'm watching police, helicopters and planes circling areas ridiculously for no real reason of safety, where they could take that same resource and watch the river. They could easily see what's going on and notify the appropriate people. But these people are right. There's not enough resources out there to protect us. And after taking 6 months off for my own paddling injuries, my first day back was on the 20th, when we as a group were all together, very visible, outriggers, boats, all of us out there in a section away from everybody else. And we were not protected. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having us. I was there on the 20th. We've been told to report these incidents. I'm Nathan Jacobson. I'm a paddle sports enthusiast. I did. I called the non-emergency 911, or not 911, but it put me to 311, and then I backed through. I was on the phone for about an hour while the boat was still in the area, offending, breaking the law, while 40 people were swimming to shore. I never got an answer. I was on hold for, at one point, 38 minutes was the length of the phone call while I waited and watched the boat, go up and down and leave. And I'd also like to put into perspective just how close they were to being in compliance with the law and not putting us in any danger, and that's about 500 yards. The incident happened under the Markham Bridge and the Hawthorne bridges that cut off. If they'd just been 500 yards downriver, doing whatever it is they wanted to do, that would have been a non-issue for anyone involved. And the situation on the Holgate Channel, all they had to be was on the other side of the island. We don't want to discourage these people from recreating on the river. It's everybody's river. But we just need to figure out a way to educate these, it's a small group of people that's causing the problem. There's only a few dozen of these $100,000 wake boats that can throw a giant wake like that are running around any given day in the city of Portland. So, and then also one other thing, they're damaging city property. If you guys don't want to go out on the Dragon boat sometime and see it, you should go down to the Holman dock on a Saturday afternoon, on a sunny Saturday afternoon, and just see if you can stay standing when one of these boats goes by, because it bucks up and down pretty dramatically. And I've been down there and watched bolts fall out of it because this piece of infrastructure that's been put in place for everybody to use is being smashed to pieces by these people breaking the law. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning.
Hi, my name's Carrie Stolzberg, and I'm an outrigger paddler. I started out as a dragon boat paddler, but for the last 6 years or so, I've been only paddling in outriggers. We keep the boats in Riverside, a River Place Marina, and go right out into the channel in the Portland Harbor. A year ago, I'm a steers person, an outrigger steers person, and a year ago we had a flip due to a wake boat that was in the Holgate Channel, which they're not supposed to be in at all. The difference between, or one of the differences between a dragon boat and an outrigger is that a dragon boat's a largely flat-bottomed boat and wide enough for two people to sit side by side. An outrigger is a long, narrow boat with 6 people in it. It's like a long, skinny U, and then there's an outrigger. They roll. They're very easily rolled. We have techniques that we can use in order to minimize the chance of flipping an outrigger, but they're pretty easily rolled boats. I want to encourage you to think about the human-powered boating community at large, all of them, kayaks, paddleboarders, outrigger, dragon boats, there's a lot of people who want to use our river. And this is such a resource for us. the city of Portland, the county, is not devoting the attention to this community and the kind of draw that it will bring to the city of Portland, we need to focus more energy and attention on our harbor and our river and our human-powered boating community as a resource for us. We need a lot more focus on that. I'm not going to repeat what everybody else has said, but I would really encourage you to, again, make this a project. Think about it. This is a resource worth keeping, worth enhancing. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's it for our public testimony, so I'll move on to R1.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, before we move on, and because we're going to have the group leaving, and because the nature of public testimony is just one way, if the group would like, I'd like to get, I don't want to say deeper dive, but more information, so it's not just one way. If somebody could contact my chief of staff, who's sitting in the corner here, about setting up a follow-up meeting, I'd appreciate it. Thanks. And thanks for coming this morning.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you, and I know the Sheriff's Office is also in contact with folks. All right, let's go ahead and move on to R1.
R1, resolution authorizing the acquisition of certain real property for the Rita Road culvert replacement situated on Soviets Island in Multnomah County.
So moved.
Can I have a second? Second. Yes. Commissioner Stegman moves, Commissioner Brim Edwards seconds, approval of R1. For those of us who do care about increasing the infrastructure that strengthens our environment and makes our community stronger, today is a big win. This action gives us the opportunity to begin negotiations for the purchase of property as part of a road and culvert repair project on Northwest Rita Road. Repairing this culvert will help us meet our transportation safety, stormwater, and habitat needs. I'll now turn it over to Courtney and John to walk us through this item. Good morning.
Good morning, Chair and Commissioners. I'm Courtney Lords with Multnomah County Attorney's Office. John could not be here today. As usual, he's like quadruple booked. So we have the project manager here with us, Michael Cook, who will introduce himself in just a moment. Before you, as you just mentioned, is a resolution that will authorize the beginning of the acquisition process for a road improvement project out on Sauvie Island. It is the Rita Road Culvert Project. It's necessary for the county to acquire certain real property in order to repair, operate, and maintain, Rita Road. The project has been planned and located in a manner that is the most compatible with the greatest public good and the least private injury. The county's acquisition procedures are in accordance with County Administrative Rule TRS 01 and all applicable federal and state laws governing such acquisition. Unless you have legal questions regarding this resolution or the specific acquisition, I will now turn it over to the Transportation Project Manager to discuss the project.
All right, good morning.
Good morning, Chair and Commissioners. I'm Michael Cook, Engineer 2 with the County Department of Community Service Transportation Division, and I am the Rita Road Project Manager. As Courtney just mentioned, we are here today asking for authority to acquire necessary real property for the Rita Road Improvement Project located on Sauvie Island. Some background on this project. In December 2021 and January 2022, heavy winter rains led to high water conditions throughout the county. On January 4th and 5th, 2022, existing culverts under Rita Road on Sauvie Island had partially collapsed, damaging the roadbed on the west side. The county coordinated with regulatory agencies and performed emergency repairs, filling the failed culverts with rock and the roadbed with rock as well to maintain roadway access to the north part of the island. Additional failures were observed on the east side on the 10th, and we performed similar repairs at that time. We had traffic reduced to a single lane with temporary signals. The county began working with the regulatory agencies to determine the permanent repair that would be needed. Rita Road is the only route to the north portion of the island, and it limits the repair options as we have to maintain access at all time. There's no other way to get there via road. In late June 2022, the temporary traffic setup was determined to be inadequate for summer traffic. As we know, it's very popular during the summer time, so we used additional rock to fill the remaining culverts, and we repaved the road and opened it to two-way traffic. While traffic has been restored since then, the underlying culvert failures have not yet been addressed. The county is required by regulatory agencies to remove all the rock that was used for the emergency repair and restore the culvert and the roadway to previous conditions. In order to perform these repairs, the county needs to provide some sort of temporary access while the road is out of service. And to be able to do that, we will need additional temporary right-of-way for an alternate route until we can perform these repairs. Approval of this resolution will authorize the county to begin taking the steps necessary for legally acquiring the necessary property to perform these repairs. That's all I have as the project. Do you have any questions for Courtney or myself?
Thank you so much. Tasha, did we have any public testimony on this item?
No, Madam Chair.
All right, we'll go to the board for questions. We'll start with Commissioner Stegman.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Michael and Courtney. Just a couple questions about the property owner and, how is the property owner receiving, so we're purchasing actual land or right-of-way, and then what kind of outreach has there been?
We have been in discussion with the property owner throughout the development of the project. With this authorization, I believe we will be able to negotiate right-of-way. The majority of the right-of-way is only temporary, and we'll be required to restore afterwards. There will be an easement, a small drainage easement, but all this negotiation will happen once we have the authority to begin right-of-way negotiation.
Okay, and how long do you think that right-of-way will be required? How long will the work take?
The work itself will probably take place over a few months in the summer. We'll need additional right-of-way for restoration for a period of a few years just to maintain and make sure we're restoring the creek to, previous conditions.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Brim Edwards.
This is just maybe a follow-up to Commissioner Stegman's, and this is more just general county practice. I'm assuming that it is done, like, you have the authority to negotiate that if there wasn't the ability to reach an agreement, you'd come back, or does the county in any circumstances do it without the landowner's consent?
So I can answer that. So this resolution is part of standard practice, but it's also consistent with federal and state law. And it's the board's formal authorization to the department and the county attorney's office to begin those federal and statutory outlined processes for property acquisition. So in other words, you would be authorizing us in the event that we're unable to reach a successful negotiation. We would then look at engaging in use of eminent domain power. Typically what would happen is we would come back before the board before that happens to make sure that you are okay with the board with the county attorney's office moving forward with filing a condemnation action.
Great, that's really helpful. How often does that happen?
Very rarely. I've been doing this for 8 years now, I want to say, with transportation, and I think I've filed a total of 4 times. So we tend to be very conservative on our acquisitions and our property acquisitions. And I'm happy to say the only times that we haven't successfully negotiated before filing condemnation is typically when it's just an adverse landowner. And once they have an attorney who helps them understand the process and how it works, it's usually very quickly resolved.
I'm sorry, when you said a total of 4 times, is that 4 times that the county has used eminent domain, or?
A total of 4 times on a road project that we've had to file eminent domain.
Okay, I appreciate that and hope it doesn't come to that. And I think what I heard you said is that before that happened, you'd come back or the commission would be notified?
Correct.
Okay, that's my only questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Beeson.
No questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Commissioner Myron.
Commissioner Myron, your mic is not working.
Or it might be really low. Is it really low?
No, I think it's off.
You hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
A nod of Jess.
I'm sorry, did you have any questions?
She's frozen.
Oh, okay. Commissioner Myron, you're frozen if you can still hear us.
And so I am curious whether, I appreciate fellow commissioners' questions about this. It sounds, especially Commissioner Brim Edwards, just to ensure before anything like a condemnation action would ever be pursued or finalized, the board needs to approve that.
So I apologize, you were cutting out, so I only caught the tail end of that. But I think, are you asking about the authority of the board? So for resolution of necessity, that is the formal authorization for transportation and the county attorney's office to begin these negotiations. In practice, before we ever file eminent domain, we do let all of you know, we actually usually bring a resolution again before the board. That step, actually, a few years ago, the rules changed, but that in practice, we have continued to alert the board and make sure that we have your approval before filing eminent domain.
Okay, that's great. And again, apologize for any technical difficulties, but and so this question may have been asked already. Has there been any, I don't know if there's informal conversation with the owner beforehand, or if they're aware that this is happening, and they have an opportunity to, even at this point, to give any feedback or opinions about this?
Yes, they are aware. The way the process works is before we even begin looking at what the impacts will be from a public project on private property, we go out and meet with the property owners, any tenants that are out there, find out what their needs are, find out what the timeline is. The project managers have met many, many times with this property owner in addition to our right-of-way specialist, and they are well aware of it. They know that it's coming. They have obtained an attorney. We just received a letter recently from an attorney that can mean something and it can mean nothing at the same time. So this is why we do the resolution of necessity to kick things off, and then we can get an appraisal of the property in which they are notified in advance. They have the opportunity to attend the appraiser being on the property and follow around and help with the appraisal process. And then eventually the appraisal comes out and we make a formal offer to them in which that begins the negotiating process.
Okay, all right. Well, I appreciate that, and I do not have any further questions. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I don't have any questions. I appreciate this work, and I love the work we do with these culverts to make sure that they are, meet our needs for transportation, but also for the environment and passage of wildlife. So thank you so much.
Madam Chair, I sent you a note that I had one additional question.
Oh,
sorry.
I didn't see that.
Yeah, sorry, I just sent it.
Yep.
I was thinking it was going to go to Commissioner Beeson, but which you'd have time to look at it. So
okay.
Sorry. I had just an additional question based on the response to Commissioner Myron's question. You said that it used to be the rule that things came back to the commission for a vote, and now you just do it for practice, but the rule changed. I would like to know, and I don't need it here at this meeting, but what rule changed that removed it from coming back to the commission? And again, I don't need to know now because I'm satisfied that that's a practice, but I would like to know what rule changed that removed some of the board's authority.
I wouldn't say that it removed the board's authority. It is our administrative rule, TRS-01, and it governs how we acquire property in transportation. And we had so many property acquisitions. We were coming before the board several years ago at least once a month, often weekly, with getting resolutions of necessity, and then we would come back if it had to go to condemnation. Again, it's very rare that we go to condemnation, and the board finally just said, we're kind of sick of seeing you, so can we tighten this up and just give you the authority to negotiate if we need to? And we said, if that's what you want to do, that's what we'll do. I've seen it, when I first started, it was a more streamlined process, then it went to a longer process, and now we're back to a more streamlined process. So again, the department's practice has always been just to notify the board, make sure everybody's on board. We don't file without making sure everybody's aware of what's happening.
Yeah, I mean, I guess this is like a transparency and governance issue that, so I'd love to see that rule that you just cited. And I think the question was not around sort of the routines, because it sounds like what you said, if there's only been 4 in 8 years in the sector, that hardly sounds like coming to the board all the time.
Only 4 in which went to condemnation, but
right. So I guess I'm
close to 100 resolutions of necessity coming forward, starting the property acquisition process.
Right. So I'm curious. It seems like maybe in streamlining the 96 that didn't actually go to eminent domain, that rule also captured the eminent domain, which is sounds like it's rare, but it is a pretty serious step. And I think when I look at these initial, giving the initial authority, it's different than looking at it in the sense of like we're going to take somebody's property. So again, I'd like to look at the rule, not to go back to the days that we're looking at every single one, but if in those cases of where it gets to that ultimate step where an agreement can't be reached, that's what I'm interested in. So I'd appreciate it.
Absolutely. We can provide you with a copy of TRS 01, and I can draft up for you a history based on my time at the county as well as what happened before.
Great.
And I will work with John Henriksen on that as well.
I really appreciate that. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So I think we've gone through the whole board, so can we have a roll call vote, please?
Commissioner Myron?
Aye.
Commissioner Beason?
Yes.
Commissioner Brim Edwards?
Yes.
Commissioner Stegman?
Aye.
Chair Vega Peterson?
Aye, the resolution is adopted. Thank you.
Thank you.
R2, Emergency Medical Services Ambulance Services Briefing.
So as I think everyone knows, Multnomah County has been in a mediation process with AMR for the past several months with the goal of improving AMR's contract compliance and delivering a consistent, timely ambulance response in our community. We entered into mediation following nearly 2 years of persistent challenges with the response times, as the paramedic staffing shortages experienced nationwide also impact Multnomah County. Our approach consistently centers accountability and collaborative problem solving, and we carried both of these values into our mediation discussions. We pursued mediation with the goal of a responsible, balanced compromise that will make a real impact on ambulance response. And I'm so glad to report that we've reached agreement through mediation to pilot more flexibility in ambulance staffing and improve response times, with sidebars to protect accountability and service quality. Today, we'll be briefed on the terms of this agreement resulting from the process that concluded yesterday, a pilot that will help us increase response times and also incentivize the AMR workforce. This board will need to adopt the temporary staffing contained in the agreement, and that will happen soon. I'm also looking towards the bigger picture and the tools we have to improve response times as we reevaluate our ambulance service plan and the landscape of EMS services in Multnomah County. We will be receiving an update on that work as well today. I want to express my immense gratitude for the incredible work of our EMS team at the health department, the entire health department, and the legal team at Multnomah County, not just for reaching a compromise agreement with our service provider, but for the depth and breadth of their expertise in doing so. I will ask the commissioners to hold questions and comments until the end to allow our presenters to work through their presentation. This will allow our presenters to stay focused and ensure that we get through all the material and support an efficient use of all our time and make sure we have time for questions. I also just want to acknowledge the folks in this room, including folks from AMR. Thank you for being here today. I saw our fire chief here. And we also have Judge Block, who was a critical part of the mediation. So appreciate the folks as well as the paramedic staff from AMR who is here. I'm also, well, now I'll turn it over to Rachel, I believe, will be kicking off the presentation. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair, Grand Rising, Commissioner Brim-Edwards, Commissioner Stegman, Commissioner Beeson, and Myron on the screen. For the record, my name is Rachel Banks, and I'm your Health Department Director. I am delighted to be here today with Dr. Bruno, our Health Officer. Welcome back to Aaron Monig from his vacation, technically, and Rob Sinnott. Today, as the chair mentioned, we're going to be giving you an overview, but I also want to echo just the thanks and appreciation for all of the EMS team, the legal team, the chair's office, and others. In this room, we have other EMS staff as well. You have decades and decades and decades of experience with EMS staff, or excuse me, with EMS systems, clinical, regulatory, operational. So I see it as a real treat and delight to be with these folks. Next slide, please. So today we have a number of goals and outcomes for this presentation. The first is to really just, again, do an overview to ground you all, again, in our EMS system, the things that we look at and our goals in that system, our role in that system. Then I will also provide you, as mentioned, milestone updates on the ambulance service plan. And as I know, we're at least probably all looking forward to a mediation agreement update and walking through what is in that mediation agreement with AMR following the conclusion of our mediation yesterday evening. And then we'll end with some next steps, including data that you can anticipate. Next slide, please. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Bruno.
Thanks, Rachel. Good morning, commissioners.
Good morning.
And for the record, Richard Bruno, he, him pronouns, Health Officer of Health Department. So we're going to start just kind of by going very broad overview about what our EMS system is and how it's an intersection of not only healthcare but also public safety and public health. So in Oregon, counties are responsible for organization and supervision of EMS in their jurisdictions, and Multnomah County, our dedicated staff provides medical direction, training, quality improvement, data analysis, system design coordination, and contract oversight. Next slide, please. And EMS is a critical link in a larger system that connects those in need with definitive care in a hospital. So calls to 911 in Multnomah County are all routed through the City of Portland's Bureau of Emergency Communication, BOAC, and medical calls are sorted through the medical priority dispatch system for an initial assessment and triage into categories that help determine which resources to send at what degree of urgency. So on-scene ambulances and their crew rapidly assess the patient and provide stabilizing care, whether simple reassurance or complex life-saving care with CPR, intubation, defibrillation. And once a patient is stabilized, the ambulance transports the patient to the hospital for ongoing care if needed. Next slide, please. All right, and the structure of our EMS system in Multnomah County has been consistent since 1995. We provide supervision of medical care through our medical director, Dr. John Ju, who joins us in the back, which includes regular trainings and updates with field providers. We have quality assurance staff evaluating the system for areas of improvement. And we run a unique service called our Tri-County 911 Service Coordination Program that focuses on helping folks in our community who highly utilize our 911 services with upfront resources to help stabilize their situation in case calling 911 and activating a higher level of care isn't needed. Next slide. All right, so these are sort of our 6 pillars of our EMS system here at Multnomah County. And since the entire county is part of one ambulance service area to provide high quality service to all residents, and by having one ambulance service area, we have a single EMS provider, which has been AMR, American Medical Response, since 1995. All 911 ambulances in Multnomah County operate under a single medical director, assuring consistency in training and oversight. All 911 calls in the county go to a single dispatch center using an internationally validated triage system. And we're lucky to have first response from fire paramedics and EMTs for many of the most urgent calls as well. Next slide, please. So I'd like to walk you through some of the EMS service models. So in terms of ambulance staffing, Multnomah County carefully and currently utilizes a 2 paramedic staffing model for emergency ambulances, and that staffing model ensures that all critical patients are attended by the highest level of critical care, ensures the development of all paramedics' knowledge, skills, and abilities through progression from new hire to second provider and ultimately to a lead provider, and ensures equitable care across the entire county. Some of the assertions that have been made in the past last week during last week's discussion on the topic, the staffing model is not unique. Actually, there's many similar sized jurisdictions, including Houston, San Antonio, Seattle, King County, Denver, Boston, Minneapolis, Pittsburgh, Madison, Wisconsin, that also employ a 2 paramedic staffing model for their ALS ambulances. And we also want to recognize the role of our fire first response agencies. They're very important to this work, both practically and contractually. They provide, for example, it was raised last week that Washington and Clackamas counties both employ hybrid 1-to-1 staffing for ALS ambulances, which is accurate. However, organization of these systems and their size and geography and their contracts are different. So we want to ensure that for each of these elements in the system that we're all working in coordination together to provide the best care. But if you've seen one EMS system, you've only seen one EMS system. There's many, many types of EMS systems that are served by different private ambulance systems, public systems anchored on fire departments, hospital-based ambulance systems, or a hybrid of those components. So these nuances make it challenging sometimes and often incomplete to compare across jurisdictions. We think it's really important to take a systems level view as we consider potential significant changes, which will lead us into our ambulance service plan assessment. Next slide, please. So drilling down a little bit from the system level perspective, we want to make sure that we're walking through this morning's presentation with a shared understanding and definitions of the levels of care that we're talking about. So during last week's presentation, there was a lot of emphasis on just the speed of the response, time to scene and transport to the hospital. And this is important, but we also feel it's important to discuss the different types and the quality of care. So an ambulance response is not just about how quickly it can get to someone in the hospital, but also about the quality pre-hospital care that's delivered and how someone with a life-threatening illness or injury is stabilized before being transported. And there's very important distinctions between what a paramedic and an emergency medical technician or EMT can provide. So for example, if I were hit by a truck outside on my bike ride in this morning out on Hawthorne and knocked unconscious and not breathing, I would definitely want 2 paramedics working simultaneously to intubate me and to start an IV line. I would want rapid defibrillation if needed and bone fracture reduction or wrapping. And these are skills that paramedics excel at. Also, another example, if one of my family members had a seizure or a heart attack, I would want rapid stabilization and medical administration by 2 paramedics before transport. And that's standard of care and shown to be most life-saving, especially in those critical moments. So to ensure the overall health of an EMS system, we track and work to improve performance measures that include not just response times, but also cardiac survival rates, stroke survival, seizure survival, trauma, and pediatric respiratory response. So all of those kind of go into our overall performance data and tracking for improvement. Next slide, please. So we wanted to make sure we're keeping the board apprised of any of all of these key milestones during our ambulance service plan assessment process. I think it's really important to note and reinforce that this is really a both-and process, that we're working to ensure both in the immediate term through mediation and the associated temporary measures there, but also through more comprehensive system-wide approach that supports our ability to plan and make system-level changes thoughtfully, responsibly, and with the full picture in mind. So I want to thank this board again for voting in February to approve contingency funding to begin an early reassessment of our ambulance service plan and the approved FY25 budget, including full funding for this work. And in bringing this request to the board in February, it was the recommendation of the Health Department that we are to consider any permanent changes to significant elements of our ASP that needs to be done through a comprehensive process. And so as a reminder, this is not a process we would usually undertake until closer to the end date of the contract with our ambulance service provider, but the significant policy questions and issues surrounding EMS, particularly regarding appropriate staffing and response times, warranted earlier evaluation. So in initiating this process, we're doing both of those things at once. We're moving forward with the temporary stopgap measures to improve things now, and we have to put into motion this comprehensive evaluative process to inform our system planning and to equip us with the information we need to determine what kind of EMS system will serve our county best moving forward. So I'm really excited to share that we've hired a key position in advancing and supporting this work. We hired a new EMS system design coordinator, Charles Miller, who's in the back. And Charles will be working directly with our team and with our contractor to develop and reassess this ambulance service plan. And this position is really critical work. In fact, Aaron was in that position 8 years ago. The next major milestone to finalize is our contractor selection. So we developed a procurement process for this work with feedback from several system partners, including our fire agencies who are represented on our evaluation panel of proposals. And we received 4 proposals for this work, and the evaluation committee is working to finalize the selection of a contractor. There were some very close scores, which is a good problem to have as it reflects the quality of these proposals. And we aim to finalize a selection in 1 week by next Thursday, August 8th. And so the next steps the contractor will be able to start once they get awarded and begin work as we expect the partner engagement portion of this work will begin likely in September. And I'll pass back to Rachel for the next slide.
Thank you. So now I'm going to turn to sharing the outcomes of the mediation, which we entered into with AMR following nearly 2 years of persistent challenges with the response times, as we know, that are required for the AMR contract. Really want to start with the approach, and that our approach has and will consistently be accountability as well as collaborative problem solving, ultimately to reach the metrics and outcomes that we want to see for our system. You all know that in November of 23, Multnomah County did invoice a fine for noncompliance, and that fine was contested by AMR and was a catalyst to the current, or now finalized mediation process. So just to remind the board of where we've been, in February, AMR circulated a proposal to change staffing across their entire deployment to hybrid ambulances with 1 paramedic and 1 EMT. This all or nothing proposal was not acceptable for a variety of reasons. One, it proposed to eliminate BLS ambulances, and as Bruno outlined, those BLS ambulances with 2 EMTs. Those provide an important system efficiency by handling the lower acuity calls that would otherwise create additional system pressure, and that's really the opposite direction of where we want to see the system moving, which is really sending the right resource at the right to every call. We also heard staff concerns, so we heard clear and consistent messages from AMR's frontline staff that a significant change could further destabilize the system through increased paramedic attrition from AMR. Thirdly, we hadn't seen enough progress on other solutions that AMR had at their disposal, most notably subcontracting to add staff capacity. Fourth, we saw neighboring counties experiencing similar challenges with response time despite employing that AMR's preferred staffing model. Furthermore, we noted that a full-scale system change was not a pilot, and that full-scale change is difficult to evaluate and compare, and be even more difficult to roll back if we didn't see the outcomes or in the event that there was any problems. And all of these factors contributed to the position that, excuse me, AMR's original proposal came with too many risks and not enough accountability. Also acknowledging, though, that in the, excuse me, all or nothing proposal, that nothing was not an option either, and so we entered in to this mediation. I'm going to share our shared purpose for the mediation was to assess staffing models, determine proposed solutions to increase the number of available and deployable ambulances, to improve response times, and to negotiate the contract penalties that AMR had incurred pertaining to those response times. Again, Multnomah County's priorities, as you can see here on the screen, that we carried into the mediation process were community safety, acknowledging that Multnomah County residents need and deserve the safe and response, care quality, that the expertise, the skills, the experience, and the training of ambulance staff matter, that care quality is not just about a fast response, but also the level and quality of pre-hospital care that is delivered by staff on scene and in transport. System accountability, namely our system relies on the dedicated first responders who staff ambulances, and the perspectives of this workforce are critical, and any solutions that we engaged in must consider and respect their voices. And again, accountability. Acknowledging Multnomah County has a responsibility to ensure that our contractors are accountable for the services that they commit to deliver, and that we consider, evaluate, and weigh the full potential impacts of any change in the type of level of service for our community. These have remained throughout the process. Next slide, please. So as has been mentioned, we are very pleased to share with the board that we've secured a signed mediation agreement with AMR that we feel represents both a responsible and a balanced compromise. I want to thank you, Chair Vega Peterson, and your staff and team for remaining committed to these principles and continuing to support this resolution. Thank you to Renee and team, have been phenomenal as we've moved through this. I can't imagine it has been easy, but your leadership has shown through, so thank you very much. The this slide outlines the elements of the agreement, so namely staffing, fines, and evaluation. And in the next slide, Rob Sinnott is going to cover each of the provisions of our agreement.
I'm not presenting any slides, but I am here. Aaron Munning, EMS administrator, and I want to chime into that last slide and say this is a mediated agreement, and so it's not perfect for either side, but I think it achieved both sides' needs and desires and gets us back to having response times met over the course of the agreement. And I'll hand it over to Rob.
And for the record, Rob Sinnott from the County Attorney's Office, and I'll echo those sentiments. I'd just like to thank our colleagues at AMR, especially their legal counsel, and of course Judge Block, who's here today with us in the back. We appreciate his perseverance in getting this done. So obviously the mediation, as other folks have said, the crux of it was really two components. It was staffing and fines. So the staffing involved three buckets. So the basic life support ambulances are the types of ambulances that go to sort of low acuity calls where the risk of the patient decompensating during transport is very low. And the parties agreed to this BLS model. It's been something that Dr. John Jew implemented several months ago, and I think we've seen success with it. So both parties were amenable to continuing it. We'd like to see 85% of calls that require a BLS response get a BLS response. And how that is helpful is that it saves paramedics, because it's just EMTs that are on those types of transports. So the parties agree that some calls don't require any paramedics, and so we don't want to send paramedics to calls where they're not required. The second bucket are these dual paramedic advanced life support ambulances. And for that, the agreement is that we're going to keep a minimum core of 20 ambulances per day, as averaged over the course of the month, that are going to service Multnomah County and be available. And this was obviously the heart of the negotiation, but we think this will be a good number that will keep levels of patient care high, but also get AMR some flexibility to put some more ambulances on the road. And the new bucket is the hybrid advanced life support ambulances, which require one EMT and one paramedic to staff them. This is what AMR has been asking us for several months. We've agreed to a pilot to enable them to allow this flexibility and put these new types of ambulances on the road. And we're going to study it over the course of the year, see how it goes, see how it impacts patient care. And I'll just say for this, there's no minimum, there's no maximum to it, which is consistent with our underlying contract. We don't typically tell AMR how many ambulances they need to have on the road. They have a ton of experience modeling and predicting the types of ambulances they need, and we're going to defer to their expertise on that. So if we go to the next slide, please. So for fines, this is really two buckets. Both parties wanted to have some idea of what we were going to do with fines going forward so that they can plan, their finance teams can plan. Right now, the accrued fines are over $7 million. With every violation of response times each month, it gets added to that amount. So what we've agreed to do is 60% of those fines, the first bucket, we're going to correlate reduction of those fines directly to performance. So if AMR meets the contractual response times, then for every month that they meet them, we're going to reduce it 1/9. And because we're starting on November 1, and the proposed end date for the end of this settlement agreement is July, that's 9 months. So we're just doing it every month. They would get a 1/9 reduction. The 40% is a little looser. I think the first component is to incentivize AMR to put additional ALS dual paramedic ambulances on the road. So everyone that they put on the road, if they average one per day over the course of a month, then they would get a $2,000 per day credit, which is a pretty significant sum. But of course it benefits Multnomah County because then we have that higher level of care ambulance on the road. And then the other aspect of it, we just left pretty open. And I think this is sort of consistent with what Clackamas County has done with fines with AMR, where they have agreed to allow those fines to be offset by other types of incentives, staff retention, things like that will more indirectly impact their ability to comply with the contract. So those are the two components of it. So next slide, please. There are other provisions in the contract. They're not as significant. They certainly weren't as debated as the staffing and fines, but there are various provisions. One that I want to point out to the board is the reporting piece. There was some ambiguity in the underlying contract as to the county's ability to report out on certain data. And we just clarified with AMR that we can send out certain reports that of course are de-identified, aggregate, protect patient privacy, but still give the public reports and insight into compliance with the ambulance service contract. And next slide. And then next steps. So the chair has signed the agreement. The county is bound to it. It does not commence, however, until the board actually approves of the temporary staffing changes that are in the agreement. And the reason for that is that our ambulance service plan has a very explicit express process on how to change staffing levels. So both parties are committed to following that process. And so once we reached agreement, Dr. John Jew is going to come back before this board and ask for the staffing change. And if the board approves of that staffing change, then the agreement itself will formally, technically commence. So that's going to be the board's role going forward. And yeah, that's back to Rachel.
Yeah, and an additional next step that Dr. Bruno is going to be talking about in the slides that we've talked about is data. So I'll pass it over to Dr. Bruno.
Great. Thanks, Director Banks. So yeah, next we want to address some of the data and information questions that were surfaced by the auditor and the ombudsperson's report earlier this month. So the specific recommendations from the ombudsperson was that the board should receive regular ambulance response time data from EMS, at least monthly for urban areas and every 6 months for rural areas due to the small data sets for those areas. And we agree that this information is an important factor in how we measure AMR's compliance, and it's critical to understanding the health and functioning of our EMS system. However, as we've shared with the board previously, that there are some limitations and considerations both with what we share and how that information can be shared and used. We want to walk through that process with you all with some information about how we propose to address those barriers. So what does the Multnomah County monitor? So we utilize First Watch, which is a third-party clinical quality improvement system that allows the county to review AMR performance data that they submit to First Watch. And it's a secure database system that aggregates information and monitors a variety of measures, including response times and other metrics. EMS is authorized to access and use First Watch for the purpose of facilitating the county's quality assurance and oversight role of EMS system. And we use it to monitor current situations and monitor contract compliance with response times and grant exceptions if indicated and calculate fines based on a per call basis. So the response times, although they're a key indicator of our ambulance providers' contract compliance and also measure a system performance, are not the only information that EMS monitors and relies on to assess health and the performance of our EMS system, as I mentioned earlier. So First Watch EMS is authorized to access and use First Watch for the purpose of facilitating our quality assurance and oversight. And the full data include information that's both confidential, that includes things like call details and identifiable patient information, and is also contains proprietary information that is owned by AMR. So in addition, response time data that is used to monitor compliance is not final at the time it's populated in the database. AMR has the ability to protest or request exemptions. So for example, if an ambulance were stuck at a train, waiting for a train to pass over train tracks, they could request an exemption for that particular call, or if their ambulance team were late to enter in their arrival time, they could request an exemption. So our EMS staff evaluates every one of those exemptions and decides if they're indicated or not to grant those exemptions. And so there's a delay between real-time response data and the finalized monthly compliance reports. That's really kind of what we're getting at. So these are reflective of the granted exemptions, these adjudicated data to the contractual response times. So we can review the information, but the initial contract language said that it can't be used publicly. So right now we are compiling this data, and the data is made public annually through our CCRRC, which is the Contract Compliance and Rate Review Committee. But that's also subject to finalization, so it doesn't really satisfy, I think, the request from the board to have more of a timely information on a monthly basis. So we're going to go through some of the sort of barriers that are proposed here. So the considerations that it's important for the board and the public to understand are that there are some barriers that we want to overcome with you all. So on the next slide, I'm going to walk you through a mock monthly report that we will begin providing to the board with details on ambulance response times and penalties in different population areas for the different severity levels of calls. And we sent a tutorial preview to each of you this morning, which includes some actual data numbers and also how to conceptualize these response time reports given the context of all the different considerations and how to interpret this. So what we'll do is we'll show you kind of how we look at First Watch as this secure platform on this data that AMR uploads. We also requested, as Rob mentioned, in our settlement agreement that was signed yesterday, to provide certain de-identified and aggregated data publicly. And so we'll work on a different format to do just that. And it's important to you as commissioners and that the public can view this public data during this ambulance staffing expansion plan and see the performance month by month. So in the meantime, it would be my preference and my pleasure to work with each of the board members to set up time to provide that tutorial on this report and review those terms, discuss in more detail the confidential data sets, explain the process and procedure by which those exemptions are granted and the fines are assessed, and then to answer any questions that you may have about that process. So I'm happy to set that up with your offices.
We're working on it.
Working on it. Great. And so, yeah, so you can see here, this is kind of a mock-up of what this report will look like. You can see the different column headings there, and I apologize, the font type is a little small, but I'll kind of go through a little bit about what those column headers look like. You can see the rows are grouped into Code 1 and Code 3, which are non-life-threatening and life-threatening. And then broken down into those rows, you can see the different demographic areas, so East County, West, North, and South County, as well as breakdowns for urban, rural, and frontier. And then on the columns, you'll be able to see how many calls were made on time, how many calls were late. You'll be able to see how many requests for exemptions were requested based on those extenuating circumstances that the ambulance may run into on their calls, and then how many of those exemptions were approved. You'll be able to see the final versions, the final calculations, as well as the response time completance, which is basically the percentage of those calls that met that benchmark. And remember, for an urban call, for a life-threatening call in an urban jurisdiction, the goal is to have 90% of the time meet 8 minutes or less. So you'll be able to see if those numbers match up to meet that 90%, and if not, you'll see a little fine assessment next to that, a penalty fine. And then you'll also be able to see how many months, consecutive months and periods are going to be in compliance over the last 12 months. And so you'll be able to track that over time, especially as we're rolling this out. And of course, all of this will have a confidentiality statement at the top, just asking to not disclose further without written permission. So that's basically what you'll get to go through in detail with me or my team, and we're happy to provide that information for you, as well as making sure that you are familiar and understand how to interpret all that raw data as well. Next slide. Oh, great. Okay. Yeah, I think we're good.
All right. Thank you so much for that presentation, both of the mediation, but the overview of the system and what's the next steps with our ambulance service plan review. I really appreciate that. I wanted to say we're going to go to the board for questions now, but I just wanted to really express my incredible gratitude to this team, to you, Rachel, Bruno, Dr. Paul Lewis, Dr. Ju, who's here in the room, Aaron, thank you so much for your work for so long. Rob, thank you so much for all of the work that you've done. And then Renee, also on my team, who did just incredible work, all of you. Reaching this measured and responsible agreement was really a heroic effort and a testament to, I think, the diligence, patience, expertise, and care of everybody who was at the table for this agreement. So just want to say, especially to our team, but everyone who was there, just thank you so much for your work and your diligence on this. I think we can all be really proud of the work and where we're at today. So we're going to go to the board for questions. I will start with Commissioner Brim Edwards.
So just a couple framing questions to start diving into the slides. My mic, thank you, Marina. So my first question is, where's the actual agreement? We have a PowerPoint, but it's not the actual agreement. So I'm curious about why we didn't get that provided, because
the agreement was sent out to the board this morning.
At what time? Okay.
Like this early this
Was
morning?
that just? Think we got the PowerPoint.
It was around 8.
8 o'clock. Yeah. Okay, so we have the actual agreement. So the other question I have is, in the PowerPoint and then in the testimony, there's discussion about the board's role in the whole process. And I'm wondering, Rob, if you can outline what that is, because it actually is not included in the PowerPoint.
Well, it is delineated in the settlement agreement, so you'll see that. It's in paragraph J, it's the final term, and it states, and I'll just read it, all provisions in the settlement agreement shall commence upon adoption of the temporary staffing changes contained herein by the Board of County Commissioners. And that language is consistent with the ambulance service plan that also requires that process.
So I'm curious then, when you said that we were bound by the agreement, the county was bound by the agreement when actually a board vote is required, and you can't actually commit to the individual board members' votes until we've voted.
Well, let me rephrase just so it's clear for you. So we have agreed to the terms of a settlement agreement. Both sides have signed it. It does not commence until the board adopts the temporary staffing change. That's how it's worded in the agreement, and that's how I'd word it in my response.
Okay. So the board is the one that has the authority to actually affect the start of the
That's
agreement.
correct.
Because the way this has been portrayed up until recently is that the board actually had no role. And we do actually have a role, and I think the announcement that there's an agreement without providing, so I'm just going to go into the getting the PowerPoint and the agreement this morning, like hours before the meeting, and then also I had requested the actual response time data, and for us, I think I got it at 9:02 this morning. I don't think a governance practice that is good governance or transparent, especially something that's been going on for a year, so I'll just say that, but I appreciate your response that this doesn't go into effect until the board actually votes to change both the ambulance response plan and the code, is my understanding?
Yeah, like I said, I would phrase it the way I phrased it as it's stated in the settlement agreement. So we want to be really precise about these things.
Okay, I was just going on the information you gave me last week.
I went back and looked at that email this morning, and it's consistent with what is in the settlement agreement. So the board has to adopt the temporary staffing change. That's the board's role.
But not the code, which is what you told me last week.
Yeah, so subsequent to adopting the temporary staffing change, the process that's in the ambulance service plan, which has not changed since 2016, and it certainly hasn't changed in this process, is that after the temporary staffing change is adopted, then the EMS folks can come back to the board and propose changes to the ambulance code in our county code. That's the process, but we're talking about different steps here. So settlement agreement first, adopting the staffing change, and then resolving any discrepancies in the county code.
But to actually implement it, the board has 2 checkpoints. Or am I misunderstanding?
The board
what
has
you're
one
saying?
checkpoint. All the board.
You're saying the code, so we don't have to change the code.
Well, we'll have to look at the code and see if we want to change. I mean, it's a temporary staffing change, so it may be advisable to make it so that the code is a little bit more flexible. And we can talk about those issues afterwards, depending on what folks want to do in that respect. But the code has a dual paramedic requirement in it. So clearly, if the board adopts this temporary staffing change, there's going to be a contradiction between our code and what's in this agreement. Now, it's possible that because the agreement is temporary by nature, that we can have that contradiction for a certain period of time. Or we can make a policy decision to update the code so that it's consistent and not contradictory with the agreement itself. So there's some policy decisions that need to be made, but for the purposes of the settlement, the board's role is in that paragraph J, and it's consistent with the email that I sent you last week.
And just being consistent with, I think, what I heard the county council say before is we always want to be in compliance with the code. So I guess I don't know that if the 2 staffing, paramedic staffing model is in the code, it seems like we'd at least need to change the code temporarily. Because I don't know, we can't just informally waive the code, can we?
Thank you for that question, Commissioner. And I think it is absolutely the case that it will always be County Council's advice that our county and all of our staff follow the county code. In unique situations such as this one, where we're having a temporary change, I think a very robust conversation will need to happen with our Board of County Commissioners about how we can best do that and implement that advice.
Okay.
And I just want to clarify, and Rob, I appreciate your questions, because I know there are questions. So the settlement agreement is something that I signed as chair, but it won't be implemented until the board actually does the change to the staffing model as an addendum to the ASP. Is that correct?
That's correct. The settlement agreement commences upon that temporary adoption.
Yeah, and I want to also make clear, we didn't bring that action today because, one, the mediated settlement agreement was just decided like yesterday evening. But intentionally, we've heard from the board that people wanted to get briefed on this, to understand the terms of agreement and make sure that we're really clear. Plus, there are the steps that we need to bring forward to make sure that the staffing model change requests are done in the proper way.
Well, absolutely. I think the commission should have not only the agreement, but what came out of the mediation, and also the response time information before we vote, which we frankly didn't get till this morning. So of course, I don't think we should act, but I am wanting to press the point that the board does have a role that this, in the terms of actually being able to implement it, because to date it's been like this is actually something the board doesn't have anything to do with, and sort of swatting away the resolution that was offered. So question on slide 12. The basic life support ambulances, it says they must respond to at least 85% of the BLS designated calls. Tell me what that means. What's the other 15%?
I guess I'll try. So a number of calls have been identified as low acuity, non-emergency calls, not requiring an ALS ambulance. Those are being actively managed. It's hard to get 100% of anything, and so it allows ALS ambulances to run a portion of those BLS calls if they aren't able to staff a sufficient number of BLS ambulances. Again, staffing any ambulance is difficult, and just trying to predict the number of calls that they're going to be able to cover a day, and we want to ensure that everybody gets an ambulance that responds to them, even if it's an over response. And that, so it sets a bar of 85% of the time that they'll get that right resource of a BLS 2 EMT ambulance for the low acuity call, and save those ALS ambulances for the high acuity calls. Without giving too much away, we had a lot of back and forth discussion about where to set that bar to ensure that enough basic life support ambulances are on duty and staffed by AMR to cover enough to get the efficiency out of that system.
Great, thanks for that explanation. And then as we move down to the advanced life support, the 2 paramedic model, it says here AMR must deploy at least 20 units a day. Currently, what is the current requirement in the, or what are they currently?
Yeah,
what's the current expectation of all ambulances?
The number of ambulances today fluctuates from day to day, and we've seen the number change month to month, again, based on hiring and people leaving. The most recent month that I looked at this morning to try and answer, it ranged somewhere between 34 and 44 ALS ambulances on duty in a 24-hour period. And so the 20 allows them to take that additional number and split up those paramedics to make those hybrid ambulances. And so it's between 34 and 44 today.
So roughly the requirement is now half.
Correct.
I mean, roughly,
to be those dual paramedic ambulances as a minimum.
Okay. I have a question about the fines on 13. Just so I understand, so it sounds like the one mechanism the county had, or the main mechanism the county had in the contract that was approved before I got on the commission, was to levy fines, and there's currently $7 million in fines, and it looks like there's a mechanism by which all the fines get waived. Is that if they meet certain requirements? Is that how I'm reading this, that the $7 million in fines go potentially through the agreement?
The math works out that if they did everything we asked at the end of this agreement, they would get down to 0 fines. Either by meeting response times for 9 months out of 9 months and doing those additional items for the other 40%. So they can't get better than all of them being waived, but they could theoretically have all of the fines waived at the end of this.
So just clarity, they've had, since we this data wasn't shared with us. We don't know that. But what I've heard is they've been out of compliance, and I'm assuming because of the fines, for over a year, that the fines for noncompliance will essentially could be almost all waived if they just comply with the contract going forward.
With the mediated agreement.
Well,
Yes.
okay. But essentially, their past fines for noncompliance, they can almost completely have waived for a year by just doing what we expect them to do in terms of response times.
Well, yeah, up to 60%. The other 40%, it's other metrics. But yeah, that's the hope and that's the goal. And the reality, of course, is with the fines, they need to be reinvested back into the EM system regardless. So even if we actually were able to collect on $7 million of fines, they would have to go back into the EMS system with the idea of these improvements.
So there's the way that slide is structured. I don't know if you could pull it up on slide 13. There is, which I'm very supportive of, approved staff retention and recruiting investments, shift bonuses, stipends, subcontracting scholarships, recruiting and retention, which I think are all positive for the people who do the day-to-day work. It's not clear how, so say they meet their contractual requirements and get their fines waived for the time that they were in noncompliance. How much of those resources, and how will that be monitored, and how will that be visible, of how much would go into this staff retention, recruitment investments? Like, how will we know that those fines actually didn't go to AMR's bottom line versus going to the EMTs and the paramedics?
Yeah, so in the agreement, we've asked AMR that they have to send us a specific proposal that we could do such an accounting, and it's subject to the discretion of Aaron Monning approving it prior to them implementing that system. So we need to give express approval, written approval, before they could offset those costs with the plans. And that was exactly our concern also.
So they're going to send us a proposal for all of the funds, or?
No, again, we have two buckets of fines, 60% and 40%. Right. So it's the 40% bucket you're referencing.
And so the 60% fines just goes to AMR if they actually meet their, it just goes back to them. They don't have to pay them. It doesn't go back to them, but they don't have to pay them if they just meet 60% of them, if they just meet their mediated agreement goals.
Yeah, the hope is to use the fines to incentivize them to actually meet their response times. That's the end goal. So if they're meeting that end goal, then we've achieved, it's been successful.
But only 40%, but the requirement on the staff retention and recruitment and other investments, that's only on 40% of the fines? Just based on the slide.
That's correct. It's 60% and 40%. So you're talking about the 40% bucket for staff retention, those issues.
Okay, so my next question is on slide 14. The term, it is a one-year agreement. What's the end date of this? That doesn't go to the end of the contract. The end of the contract is what date?
The contract still has 4 years on it.
Okay, so we have a one-year agreement.
Yeah, so
what's the mechanism that we don't get back into this same cycle again? It just seems, so we're making a temporary change. What is the glide path out, since it took over a year for us to get the agreement? I'm just surprised at the shortness of the length. What is in here that we know that will have continued response time compliance?
Yeah, in paragraph J of the settlement agreement, we've set out specific dates. So by February 15th, the parties are going to meet and confer. And then we've also agreed that 90 days before July 31st, 2025, so 90 days before a year from now, so 9 months, the parties are going to make sure they get together and talk about whether or not the settlement agreement's going to end, or if we're going to continue it, we're going to modify it, we're going to do something different. And so we've put a 90-day notice period in there so that it's temporary to July 31, 2025, but it's upon 90 days written notice that would be provided before that end date. So if the parties want to, so the idea is to keep it flexible. The idea is that we're going to meet, we're going to confer, and we're going to talk about whether we want to continue it, we want to modify it.
But there's no actually requirement that AMR agree to that.
Agree to what?
To whatever it is that we set out. Say if they're not still meeting their response times, or our approach is we still think we should have a heavier balance of 2 paramedics. Say that's what the health department recommends. And so we were like, okay, you had a reprieve of a year where we changed the staffing model to accommodate the fact that you don't have enough paramedics to staff the model that we want. Does the county have any ability other than like they just agree to come back to the table? And the reason I'm concerned about it is it seems like the fines were not effective in getting agreement. It took a year, and just the impact on the community of having slow response times for a year. So I'm just concerned of like, we've agreed that we're going to come back and talk about it is not very reassuring.
Well, I think both sides are pretty committed to making sure that we're looking at the data as the settlement agreement progresses. So it's not just response times, it's also quality of patient care. So they'll be looking at that. Because if the response times are met, but the patient care has been significantly reduced in that time frame, then of course that would be a relevant factor too to making that determination. So we're going to look at all sorts of metrics. It's my understanding, we have a good relationship, especially with some of the folks that have been put in charge of regional operations at AMR. We're constantly in communication with them. So those conversations are going to happen, and we have certain dates in the settlement agreement to make sure that they happen.
Again, I'm just concerned because it took a year for us to get here. In terms of the staffing model that we're going to, this the changing the mix of basic life support and advanced life support, this is essentially what was proposed by Commissioner Myron, a variation of it, changing the staffing model.
I'm sorry, Commissioner, what's your question?
The question is, the mediated agreement is essentially a changing of the staffing model, which was what Commissioner Myron proposed a while ago. Just sort of the general essence of how we're improving response times.
I mean, I would say, yes, we heard Commissioner Myron loud and clear on her proposal, and we wanted to make sure that if we were to do that, we would do it in a very specific way. And like, as we laid out earlier, we have to have proportions of BLS, ALS, and hybrid ALS. We couldn't do like an all or nothing transition. That just didn't make sense with the overall system health. So, yes, it was heard, and we worked out a way to make this work for both sides.
I would say it was very important for me and for this mediation team that whatever agreement we came to with AMR was actually responsive to the system as a whole, and wasn't just responding to just an overall change in staffing model without looking at the other impacts on the system.
Given this is my chance to ask questions, I just wanted to confirm, because I wasn't implying anything else. I was just, there's been a lot of conversation about this staffing model, and also many representations about why it couldn't be done, and without data actually being provided to the Commission on response time. So I'm just wanting to make sure I understand what's been agreed to, which is some sort of a hybrid model, but does modify. The main mechanism to improving response times is a changing of the staffing model.
A change of the staffing model is definitely a component of this mediated agreement.
And then that's all the questions I have. We'll have some comments after everybody else makes their statements.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Beeson.
Thank you, Chair. I had some of the same questions that Commissioner Brim Edwards had, so those have been answered. Can you remind me, has AMR actually paid fines, meaning transferred cash to the county or to escrow, or are these just accrued?
Accrued. No,
okay.
No collection of money has occurred.
Okay. And then one of the things that we heard was some critique about whether we were using the BLS model to its highest advantage. And so is the 80%, or sorry, the 85% agreement help us get to that place?
Every percentage point we add to BLS is a savings of ALS. A minimum commitment of 85% is 85% more than we have today, so it is helpful.
Okay, thank you. And then I know more about our EMS system than I ever thought I would ever know, and I still am learning. So that tutorial that you all are offering, is that something, given the highly public nature of this crisis that has been going on, as many of us know, for far too long, is there an opportunity to brief more people than just us on that tutorial? Granted, I recognize that some of that information we've promised confidentiality, but it just feels like part of what the challenge has been is understanding the complexity of our EMS system. And if people are more and more interested in it, it seems like we should be making that available.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Beeson. For the record, Rachel Banks. So the short answer is yes, we'd be happy to do that, both the tutorial for you all individually as well as information for the board, and also be working towards making dashboards and easy to understand things that the public can see as well.
Great. And I know, and I understand and agree with Commissioner Brim Edwards, it's hard to get some of this information super late in the game, but I also recognize we're getting it as soon as mediation is over, and we're all not going to be here in plenty of August. So we're kind of caught between the perfect moment where we all would be here to hear this information. But as I understand, we are getting this briefing, and we will have quite some time to go deeper in understanding it, whether it's through the tutorial and a deeper analysis. And then we will actually have at least one board action, if not two, if we want to make code changes. Is that correct?
I'll speak to the first part of it, and then Rob, if you wanted to add anything. So that is correct, and just want to apologize. Clearly, we were working literally to the evening to get this signed and then finalize materials and get that to you all. It's our ongoing intent, clearly, to get information in advance, and we'll do that moving forward. But absolutely, so the next action, you would have sufficient time. We'll make ourselves available as early as this week to go over that information and answer any questions that you may have before your next board action.
Yeah, that was why this is important, that this was just a briefing to be able to introduce the data, the agreement, and the information to the board, to have time to process this at questions before the board is being asked to take any action.
But I'm just saying the data that's been requested for weeks came across at literally 20 minutes before the county sent out the press release announcing the mediated agreement. And just
okay, thank you, Commissioner. I mean, I hear you. I just want to give Commissioner Beeson his time.
Thank you. I mean, I hear Commissioner Brim Edwards' concern if we've been asking for data. I don't understand all the proprietary nature of some of the data and why that's been challenging, but I recognize, or I believe, that the settlement agreement allows us to have access to data sooner, more recent data sooner than we've been able to get it. Is that correct?
The commissioners have always been able to access data and get briefings from EMS, so none of that has changed. You're certainly entitled, as the governing body for the county, to that data and to look at it, at least to the extent it's still protecting patient privacy, which my understanding is the commissioners have never asked for individually identifiable information. So putting that aside, what is in the settlement agreement goes beyond that and states that if we want to release to the public certain summaries to report on AMR's compliance with the contract, we can do that. But that's a different issue, I think, than what you're concerned about, what Commissioner Brim Edwards is concerned about.
But I just asked for the information. I didn't say I was going to release it. I get confidential, privileged information all the time as somebody who's been in elected office for over 11 years. And
thank you, Commissioner.
I'm just saying it's not accurate. I want to just let Commissioner Beeson know that I did ask for it and I didn't get it until this morning.
Thank you. I just want to respect Commissioner Beeson's time.
Thank you. I appreciate that, and I do. Commissioner Brim Edwards should receive data in relatively timeliness as we all should. So I recognize that frustration, and I would share it too if I had made that request. I will have some comments, but I recognize like there's a whole lot to be mad about, and there's also a whole lot to be hopeful about in reaching this agreement. It's taken far too long to get here, in my opinion, and I'm sure I'm not the only one that thinks that. And I have no insight into why it has taken this long, but I do want to just appreciate that a lot of people spend a lot of time going deep and meeting in the middle or somewhere along on multiple points. So appreciate all of that work. I also just want to appreciate that all the folks involved in EMS have been very giving of their time to me and my staff to try to learn more and more about this system. So appreciation. Thank you. Those are all my questions.
Thank you. Commissioner Myron.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great, thanks. So I have questions, comments, and then I would like to sort of specific comments related to things that I heard here, but I would like to come back around for closing remarks. And I think the timing of this, like late into the night and getting the contract signed and, you know, not getting it until this morning, that this isn't a coincidence. It is a situation, frankly, of the chair's own making. It created this artificial goal, just like with deflection, just like with the IGA, that then everyone is scrambling to meet so that we can get a press statement out saying that something has been done or solved. But that something just raises more questions than it answers. And I think your chair's introduction explained a lot. The first thing you said was that your goal was to deliver contract compliance. That's an impressive admission because it actually explains a lot for me. That in failing to act, this was never about a crisis involving saving lives, reducing harm, supporting our incredible firefighters, other first responders who stepped in to fill in for our failure to have enough ambulances on the street. The goal was about contract compliance, a whole different thing, and that doesn't fit into the structure of emergency response. But it did clarify a lot. And I want to correct the record because there were a number of specific misleading statements, misrepresentations, and blatant, I'm going to call them inaccuracies. I don't want to imply intent, but at this point it's hard to feel they're not intentional, but in the presentation. And first, when Commissioner Brim Edwards asked about my proposed staffing model change, it actually sounded to me like you never actually even read my resolution, let alone listened when I had conversations with you. I'm speaking to the chair, but I think also Rob described it, so I don't know if he read the resolution either. Any of my in-person comments, the panels we had, and so maybe that's the problem all along. You didn't hear what I was proposing because I never proposed an all or nothing staffing model change as you're characterizing it here. I proposed changing the model from being mandatorily 2 paramedics in ALS to temporarily being permissive for a temporary pilot so that we could, use some form of a hybrid model to fill in during the emergency, during this crisis threatening lives. And so to characterize it and keep saying, I think Rachel, you maybe said it too, that, Commissioner Myron wanted an all or nothing pilot.
Commissioner, I just want to correct for the record, that's not what I said.
Yeah.
I was speaking about the AMR proposal. I never said one word about your proposal. Thank you.
Okay. Those AMR. I'm not sure AMR has proposed an all or nothing, but they never did to me. So I'm not sure what they have proposed to you, but they never proposed all or nothing for me. So, but I appreciate that. I take that back, Rachel, and I apologize. But it also might, but that seems to explain a lot, not understanding what I was actually proposing. Rob, in your presentation, you said that AMR had asked for staffing changes for months. AMR has asked for, as have I, for changes, exact changes for a year and a half. A few months ago is when all the jurisdictions in the county came together to approve their own resolutions begging the county chair to change the staffing model, except for Multnomah County because the chair refused to put my resolution on the agenda at that time. So it's not been a few months. It's well over a year that AMR has asked for the staffing changes. In the presentation, again, maybe this explains a lot. We talked about consistency and stability in our ambulance system since 1995. That's ancient history for EMS systems and technology and medical advances. And so maybe that explains what the problem is. The systems have evolved significantly and maybe we're sort of stuck in the 90s. I just questioning. It was mentioned that as if these are direct comparisons, that many jurisdictions have 2 paramedic models. I know there was reference to everything's somewhat different, they're all their own, but suggesting that jurisdictions with 2 paramedic models, many exist like Multnomah County, and that is absolutely false. The jurisdictions that have 2 paramedic, even the ones mentioned, their systems are so different from Multnomah County, they're like comparing apples and bicycles. And so, yeah, if we had a robust, informed, engaged model, maybe there's a comparison. But to suggest that direct comparison is just erroneous. So I guess my questions at first was about the 20 ambulances a day. And I appreciate Commissioners Brim Edwards and Beeson asking about that, how many we actually have now. I did skim the agreement that I received this morning just before the board meeting, and it gives me concern, and I was very confused, both as an ER doctor, but also as a lawyer. So it is very difficult. It does not convey to me what actually you described in the presentation as pertaining to the hybrid model. One of the things, for example, it says, I have so many, I'm going to send you just a marked up version of the contract because I have so many questions about it. But for the hybrid in particular, the section says for ALS, first it says for ALS, dual paramedic ALS ambulances, AMR shall deploy a minimum of 20 units per day under dual paramedic ambulances. All ALS ambulances shall be staffed with a minimum of 2 paramedics. So an ALS ambulance shall be defined as an ambulance with a minimum of 2 paramedics. Then the next section says, for hybrid ALS ambulances, these are staffed with a minimum of 1 paramedic and 1 EMT. But hybrid ALS ambulances are ALS ambulances. So I don't understand what you're saying here. It seems internally contradictory. So can you clarify that for me?
Well, so this was a change, I'll just state that AMR had requested because they wanted to make sure that it was clear that the hybrid ambulances were hybrid ALS. So I think both AMR and EMS read it the same. It may be unclear to you, but one of them's ALS and one of them's hybrid ALS.
So hybrid ALS is not a subset of ALS?
ALS is defined in the contract as 2 paramedics, and hybrid ALS is defined as 1 EMT and 1 paramedic.
Okay, that's so confusingly written. So that's not what it suggests, I'm just saying. But, and then it says, AMR shall ensure that all BLS, ALS, and hybrid ALS ambulances are dispatched per various instructions. So are there different protocols for hybrid ALS and ALS ambulances?
They'll be unrestricted. They will be unrestricted and able to respond to any emergency call.
So I guess, again, for me, I believe that should happen, so I don't want this question to suggest I'm stating otherwise. But again, if EMS is saying that for certain, there's like some conditions you really, really need to have 2 paramedics. Those are the urgentest of conditions. So, and they've been saying all along for 1.5 years, it's not safe to do 1 paramedic, 1 EMT for ALS. Wouldn't they, per their own statements, be saying we need to, dispatch the ALS ambulances differently than the hybrid ALS? Like, it doesn't make sense to your saying both that 2 is necessary for safety. We're going to have 2 paramedic model and then a 1-1, and we're just going to all throw them together and dispatch to the same things. If you're actually being honest about the safety issue. Do you understand what I'm saying? It doesn't make, it seems inconsistent.
We can have a very long conversation at some point.
Okay, I would like to have that.
The difficulty about managing 3 separate tiers and deploying them to cover the entire county and carve out those calls is a very difficult endeavor.
So, okay. Well, I'd love to have that clinical conversation, just because basically in saying this, what it is saying, which is what I have been saying all along, is that a 1 paramedic, 1 EMT model is as safe as an 2 paramedic model in virtually all cases. That's just kind of a reality. So anyway, I think that there are lots of questions I have about the contract itself. I don't think it's clear. I had been under the impression that there would be some discussion with the board, not just the this contract will go into effect when we sign off on the staffing change. But I find this whole process confusing, concerning, and unnecessarily delayed when we just get to a point where we're saying, oh yeah, do that thing that our first responders and firefighters and other jurisdictions and an ER doctor on the board have been calling for a year and a half. But anyway, I do have comments, so at the end, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Stegman.
Thank you, Chair. I want to really express my gratitude to, I'm sure, the many of you who were working through the night while I was fast asleep in bed. I find it ironic that this board often implores you all to move at lightning speed and then complains about the fact that you're moving at lightning speed. So I just want to recognize, Dr. Ju, Dr. Lewis, Rachel, Dr. Bruno, Aaron, and Rob, and especially Renee. None of us is happy about the length of time that this process has taken, but we also have to recognize that there are two parties involved here, and that negotiations do take time. So I just want to appreciate all of your hard work, and I do believe that our intention that the board and the chair represents has been to serve the people of Multnomah County, to have not only the quickest response, but also providing the highest quality of care. So I do have a couple questions, or more than a couple maybe, but on the actual agreement that we received, it talks about in number 8 on page 3 about minimum shifts. And I just didn't, can somebody just kind of explain that? What does that mean, or what is the intent of number 8?
I'll take the first shot at it. Aaron Munning, EMS administrator. AMR employs a number of employees, both full-time and part-time employees. They also have business other than our 911 contract, and this requests that their part-time employees work a minimum of 3 shifts, 36 hours, in the 911 system, so that they're getting that exposure to the emergency calls, and AMR is getting those employees to fill those openings that they will inevitably have trying to put more ambulances on duty. That also means that AMR is going to have to work with their union in order to meet our requirements. And again, there's some clinical reasons. They have paramedics working in the 911 system and having that exposure to doing more procedures on more sick patients and working consistently. And that, we have never asked that previously, but again, we've seen a number of employees who are paramedics in the system, and they're working a lot of special events and not working in the 911 system, and we're missing them from filling those openings, and it's an opportunity that we're asking AMR to take advantage of.
Great, thank you, Aaron. That's very helpful. On page 4, under D, it talks about, I think it's D, maybe it's not D. Anyway, somewhere it talks about existing customers that AMR has versus new customers or contracts. So can you talk to me a little bit about that?
I won't take the legal perspective of it. Again, we think the 911 contract should be, Multnomah County's 911 contract should be their primary concern, but they have other contracts, and they have requirements to do those. They can't easily get out of them, and so what we're asking is that they prioritize doing Multnomah County 911 contract work and not adding existing special event, standby, non-related 911 contracts that they don't already have. We didn't ask them to exit out of the existing contracts that they have. And I need to be worried about all of those because, again, the special events have needs for ambulances, and we're responsible for regulating ambulances, not just emergency ones in the county. So we're over all of them. This puts some restrictions on expansion of non-contract related work.
Can you move a little closer to the mic, please?
Sorry.
Thank you.
Yes. Yes, I can.
Thank you, Aaron. That's really helpful. But I guess, so what happens, I don't know, let's say they have a contract with a concert provider, and let's see who's really popular. I'm thinking of Lady Gaga, but different generations have different people, right? Taylor Swift, okay? And Taylor's going to come to town, and she's going to do 10 concerts, but they already have a contract with a concert provider. they can still provide ambulance services because they have a contract with that
Correct.
provider?
They have existing contracts with venues to provide that service, and they will continue to do that work even though they've agreed to meet these new minimum requirements for us.
Okay, thank you. And then I have a question about the actual, which I think is the crux of the problem, is the lack of workforce around EMTs and paramedics. I was told by indirectly by people that provide our ambulance services that there is not a shortage of EMTs, which I was really surprised to hear. Is that our assertion as well? There's not a shortage of EMTs?
I've heard there is a shortage of EMTs. I just spent some time crossing the country. There's a shortage of EMTs across the country. It's easier and takes a shorter amount of time to train and make and produce EMTs than what it takes to paramedics. And so in order to meet this agreement, they're going to have to do some investment in making providers that we don't have currently. And we've heard that there's been a shortage of EMTs in the non-emergency medical transport world for years. We actually, during the pandemic, changed our non-emergency BLS ambulance standard to only require one EMT and a qualified driver because those vendors were unable to staff with 2 EMTs.
Interesting. So I sit on the board for Work Systems, Inc., and I had discussed introducing a grant proposal that we could pay for people to go to EMT school, maybe provide housing, a stipend, childcare, and that was not, I was told EMTs were not a problem. So I find it disappointing that AMR would, essentially it's free money to get people into the workforce. So I find that very disappointing, and I'm hoping that, well, I mean, unfortunately the money is going to dry up because it's part of the Future Ready Oregon grant program, but that's another story. So, and I know that we are going to be talking about the ambulance service plan, but I mean, I feel like AMR is a monopoly because we don't, so I'm kind of confused, like, okay, we're saying you can contract with other ambulance service providers, which is Metro West. Like, who are these other ambulance service providers?
Yeah, it's a more limited market locally with AMR having the large franchises in our county and the neighboring counties, but they aren't the only service that employs EMTs. Life Flight has operated ground transport, Metro West, Comtrans. We have several agencies that are licensed to operate various ambulances within Multnomah County. It is more limited. You go to other parts of the country and they may have 30 or 40 smaller companies all competing where it's actually a competitive marketplace. It's less competitive here.
Okay, thank you. And I know, again, we're going to be talking about the ASP, which I look forward to, but I'm I hope that we look at, I'm not clear as to why we are contracting with a for-profit company versus looking at operating it internally, which I know is probably really scary. But I mean, can you talk to me about, like, is that something that we would consider?
I hope that our contractor looks at all different models. Before moving out to Oregon, I actually worked in LaPorte County, Indiana, so my little shout out to LaPorte County. They operate a county-based third service, so I was a municipal employee working for the county on a county-run ambulance. Every single system has challenges and things that they excel at. Being a county employee, you get slightly different benefits than a private vendor can offer. It also increases the expense of running the service. So again, I hope we look at all of the different models, including hospital-based, third service, fire-based. There are a lot of different ways of running it, and they all take funding from whoever's doing that. And again, I hope we look at all of those different models as we're going through this process.
Great. I look forward to that conversation. I mean, we know, I think, when you look at the private prison system and for-profit companies, I have some concerns about working with for-profit companies who have different motives than what the county government has.
Yeah, and I don't want to discount AMR. They've been a very positive partner since 1995, even with our recent struggles in compliance.
Absolutely. I mean, I own a business. I'm not, faulting, but I'm just saying when you own a business, you have a different motive than when you're the largest safety net provider in the state of Oregon. And I'm wondering how are if you can provide some feedback. Previously, we've had paramedics come and testify, I think EMTs, and I'm just wondering, are they feeling, because I can understand, like, if you're used to having 2 paramedics, and now you have a person who doesn't have the same level of expertise as your partner. Can you talk about, is that a concern? Is it a thing? It's fine? Where are we at with that?
I can't answer that. I have concerns. I am sure they have concerns. There is a area within this contract that allows AMR to potentially spend some extra money addressing those concerns with the workforce, and I hope that they come forward with some proposals that help answer that, either by investing in the employees or with wages or stipends or bonuses to ensure that we don't see any issues with workforce.
Okay, thank you. And some of the testimony we received from some of our partners last week, do we have an idea of the number of calls that are inappropriately dispatched that were at where a lower level of care was called for, let's say a basic life support, when actually an advance, it turns out to be a way worse call? Like, do we know, like, how often that happens?
Yes, we have a mechanism where the BLS, the basic life support crew, EMTs, can upgrade calls, and it changes the call type, and so we monitor those fairly closely. And the ones that are upgraded to ALS, but very infrequently are they life-threatening issues. They're pain management, they're nausea, they're things that are above and beyond what an EMT can do. But we watch them very closely. Again, that was part of the implementation of the basic life support pilot. I don't even know when we did that. August of last year, I believe, is when we started that.
And is that something that, in that data dashboard that we're looking at, is that something that we as county commissioners can track or have access to?
County commissioners are able to have access to all of the data. We just need to figure out how to sit down and explain what you're looking at.
Okay. And regarding metrics, so I appreciate you bringing up not only response times, but patient care. How is patient care documented, and how are those metrics? And is that something that we can get in that dashboard?
So AMR does all the documentation, so they are the provider. We receive the data as part of our quality assurance role as the county of their data, and then do our quality and improvement and quality assurance reviews of those calls. They are patient care records, so they're patient care charts or data from that. And sometimes the numbers are very, very low for the issues we're looking at. So again, trying to figure out how we de-identify it in a way, and again, make it understandable that what you're looking at.
Okay. Well, hopefully, I'm sure you'll be working with the board as we request specific data in that dashboard. So you had mentioned we did have a BLS pilot. Is that correct?
We've been operating BLS ambulances. We requested that AMR staff basic life support 2 EMT ambulances in December of 2022. The first one went on duty in April of 2023.
And was AMR able to staff? Why was, I'm hearing that that pilot was not successful, and I'm not really understanding why.
I don't know that I would say it wasn't successful. It just took a very, very long time for it to ramp up and to get sufficient numbers of EMTs and ambulances deployed to see any benefit on the road. I listened to the last board briefing where I believe some of the EMTs said that needs to scale up. And the issue is it does. It needs to scale up. It needs to cover as many of those calls as it can. I think over the last several months we've seen up to 10 or 12 of those basic life support ambulances on in a day, but not necessarily all hours of every day.
Okay, well, so it has been a successful pilot. Okay, very good, thank you. And I had heard too, which I was surprised, so the county actually owns the ambulances, is that correct?
No, AMR owns the ambulances and we hold the titles. So,
we hold the titles.
Correct. So they can't get rid of the ambulance. Nobody can come in and repossess the ambulance from AMR because we hold the titles to them.
Wow, this is so complicated. Okay, interesting. All right. And how many ambulances do we hold the title to?
I believe we have 42 titles. They have a contract requirement that requires them to have 130% of the peak deployed number of ambulances a day. So in a day at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, they peak at 31 ambulances, and we have 42 titles to account for that.
All right. And then about the authority of the board versus the chair. So I just want to make sure that I understand, Rob, that you said that the board has the authority to change the staffing model, correct? Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. And I do, I think, I don't know that was like super clear to me early on. When in conversations, so I think communication could have been a little bit, I mean, I'm thrilled that we have that authority, but I do think that is something to take note of in future situations about exactly what the board's authority and role is. And then regarding the settlement agreement, legally, it sounds like the chair can sign the agreement, but legally, the board doesn't have to approve it. Like, the chair has the authority to sign that agreement and bind it. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so I do want to thank and appreciate the chair because she legally does not have to bring this back to the board, and yet has chosen to do so. So I just want to recognize that I do believe that she has listened to this board and has taken into consideration what our desires are, and I just want to appreciate that. So
I appreciate that. I just want to clarify, the board is required to make a staffing change
right
through the ASP. So the agreement
the staffing change.
Yes, exactly.
Yes, yes.
That is the element.
Hey, Commissioner Brim Edwards, I'm talking, thank you. But yes, I get about this, and that's what I've got clarity about that. But anyway, I just want there to be a recognition that this chair has tried to acknowledge the questions, the concerns that I have had, and I believe that many of my fellow board members have. So with that, I just want to recognize that this has been a challenging, heartbreaking, lengthy process, and we can sit around and complain about what happened yesterday, last year, all we want. It's not going to make a bit of difference. But what we can do is adopt an agreement, move forward, and protect our community members as best we can. And because of you, our team, our staff, that's what's happening. So I want to thank you all from the bottom of my heart and appreciate all of you who stayed up all night to make sure that we had this briefing today. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go to the board for comments. I just had one question, Rob. If you could clarify what it's going to look like when the request to change the staffing model with the ASP is going to come, because that is actually going to come through the EMS medical director, correct?
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it would probably be a resolution would be the appropriate mechanism to do that.
Yeah, we'll have continued conversation with the board. We do have some options, and we want to make sure it's presented in a way that meets all expectations.
But I just want to clarify, it's a request that comes through the EMS medical director to the board.
Yeah, per the ambulance service plan, there is a process for making changes to staffing. So again, that's the process we want to follow so that we're in compliance with that ASP, which of course has been approved previously by the board by, several years ago, but also by the Oregon Health Authority. So we want to follow that process. And in that process, there's a provision that states that the EMS MD, the EMS medical director, will make that proposal, make that recommendation to the board. And so it'd be my recommendation to the health department that we follow the process that's laid out expressly in the ambulance service plan.
Great, thank you, I appreciate that clarity. All right, we will go now for board comments. We'll start with Commissioner Brim Edwards.
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation and the answering of the questions. Again, I'm sorry that we got the information so late, and it led to having very little time to process it in order to be able to ask questions. I also want to thank the Teamsters, just generally, their paramedics and EMT, who every day are doing work out in the field under pretty challenging conditions and who are providing service as best they can, given the resources they have to provide service to all corners of the county. I'm happy that we have a mediated agreement and that it's designed and its intent to improve response times for the next year. And I was also happy to see the comments in the press release this morning from the Teamsters that they're supportive. I want to recognize Portland Fire Chief for the presence both last week when we had a fairly lengthy discussion and for waiting for a very extended period of time and for correcting the record. I feel like that sort of out in the broader community, the fire department was thrown under the bus as the reason for why we had to stick to a staffing model that had delayed response times. And I really appreciate you being here last week to share exactly how the fire department works in close concert with EMS and the paramedics and the EMTs who show up. So I really appreciate the partnership. It's really important, and I'm glad that you had a chance to share exactly what that partnership looks like, and to really clear the air that what the fire department does do, and they're an absolutely critical partner. And again, not just the chief, but also all your firefighters who are out responding to calls all the time. I'm appreciative that we have an agreement. I have a couple concerns that I'm just going to lay out. One that is just, as I already mentioned, that is in a one-year agreement. It took over a year to reach the agreement, and then just having an agreement to come back to the table, having been involved in lots of negotiations over the last 30 years, just an agreement to come back to the table does not an agreement make, nor necessarily do I see that the county has any additional leverage or additional or effective leverage, especially since the fines agreement is they get their fines abated just by that were fines for noncompliance just by complying going forward. So I'm concerned about that, and we'll want to make sure that there's a much higher degree of communication with the board as we head into that next year in the window in which we have the reopener or the review. My second issue is, I'm going to restate that I'm very concerned elected officials were denied information on ambulance response times, and I explicitly asked for that. I've been an elected official over the last 20 years, and all the time elected officials are given privileged and confidential information in order to do their jobs. And frankly, it's insulting and inappropriate that we were denied information, access to the information as decision makers. As has been discussed this morning, the board does have a role, and the fact that we're elected representatives and community members who are being left to wait, and the board that's elected to represent them weren't sure how long actually the response time waits were, I think is pretty appalling. And also we had a recommendation from the ombudsman that recommended that we receive the information. Again, I think elected officials should receive the information they're entitled to receive. Certainly it can be given to us with whatever caveats need to be made in terms of confidentiality, and I think commissioners can be trusted with that information, and it's how we're going to make better decisions. So I'm really disappointed for the over the last year that information wasn't provided. I also believe in terms of transparency, there's been lots of media reports about very specific incidents which lead the public to believe that they, and to know that there's delayed response times, but not only do we not have that information, but also our accountability to the broader community to see like what kind of services is Multnomah County providing. I think it's absolutely critical that we have some sort of dashboard with whatever caveats and sort of anonymized information, but that needs to be put out there so that really the county, AMR, can be held accountable for delivering the services that we're responsible for delivering. And the third issue that I'm concerned about, and this again is not any related to the parties that negotiated the agreement, and I'm appreciative that we have it before us, but I feel a stiff arming of the board when the board raised the issue of the staffing requirements, and also the preventing an elected commissioner from putting something on the agenda and having a discussion about it. And I think, you know, Commissioner Stegman, your comments about just getting clarity of what the role is. So I've been new for the last year, but I have asked repeatedly, what is our role? And it wasn't until after last week's meeting when representations were made that the board didn't have a role that I asked the county council what our role was. And actually the mediated agreement can't go into effect without board action. So the representations all along that the board really is not responsive, even though I think our constituents feel like we have a role, and we have a role, we clearly have a role to play, that I feel like the board was prevented from actively engaging in the conversation and having information that impacted our constituents. So I'm looking forward to having more time to go through it, to getting the briefing, to having the dashboard being gone through, and hope that when we have it come back that we have the information we need to make decisions on behalf of our constituents. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Beeson.
Thank you, Chair. I don't know that I have much more to say that I haven't already said. You know, I think it's clear that there are many experts who have weighed in, including Commissioner Myron for quite some time. Based on, at least from what I understand, we were one of the offices that reached out very early on to the Teamsters to try to understand from paramedics' perspective what was happening on the ground, and continue to hear a different story from them than from other places. So it always leads me to believe that when we continue to talk past each other, and Commissioner Myron's own point that in her mind, her proposal was not saying 100 exclusively one-to-one, and I see it happen on this board and frankly across jurisdictions, that instead of taking the time to seek to understand each other, we are going right into our corners. And oftentimes the mediation is the place where that is no longer possible, because folks have to come to an agreement and they generally have to base that agreement on some hard looks at the data and some compromise. So I am excited that that people spent a lot of time, more time than I would have wanted, far more time, to get to the details and to get to that compromise that we have before us. I recognize we will also have some time to go deep, and we'll have another chance to ask questions when we're asked to vote. And I look forward to that opportunity. I do want to echo some of what Commissioner Brim-Edwards said. If we don't have clarity on exactly the steps forward of like the chair has an authority and that authority might then ultimately require board action, that's different than the board can act singularly. And so I do have some, I think it was some muddiness there. But I also recognize that that we are now at a place where we can move forward, and that feels incredibly important to acknowledge. So thank you very much for all the information and for the many hours, and I'm sure late hours, in getting us to a resolution, all the folks who were involved. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Myron.
Thank you again. Just sound check to make sure the technical stuff is working.
Yes, we can hear you.
Awesome. Okay, thank you. So just responding, I think Rob had said that the county is able, that the board is able to change the ambulance staffing, because I was just quickly checked my emails because I've been going back and forth with everyone, including the county attorneys, for over a year. And in an email, I believe from Jenny Madcourt, says the board, because I asked about this, I looked at every possible thing this board could do to force action to address the emergency. And the email says the board process for amending the code is easy, but identifying an effective amendment is challenging. Any such amendment needs to be with consideration of state law, the ambulance service plan, and recognition of the current contract with AMR. Both the ASP, the ambulance service plan, and AMR contract require a 2-paramedic response. So I'm curious, you're saying, it sounds like something different that you're saying, that the board, without changing the ambulance service plan or doing anything else, would be allowed to change ambulance staffing, because I was told we could not do this very specifically by county council. And so it's it's distressing to hear this suddenly, a year later. So I just want to confirm that I'm understanding correctly.
Well, it'd be good to know the specific question that you had asked Ms. Madcourt, but I think the reality is the parties needed to reach agreement because there's a dual paramedic staffing requirement in the contract itself. So AMR and the county, to effectuate a change, needed to have a meeting of the minds on what a settlement agreement would be, and then we'd go through an ambulance service plan process to put that change into place. So it sounded to me, based on what you read, that perhaps there was consideration from the county attorney to the contract itself, which would have also needed to be amended in order to have an agreement. Because remember, the dual paramedic requirement is in 3 legal sources. It's in the contract, it's in the ambulance service plan, and it's in our code. So if we were ever going to change it, all 3 of those would need to change on some level. Whether they change temporarily, whether they change permanently, they would need to logically, we would need to make that change.
So, well, thank you for that clarification. And maybe it was just my understanding, but that sounds very different from what I thought I heard you say earlier. And you were on this email exchange. It involved all of us, so I can reshare it with you. And it was about the question, and my understanding was what you said just now, which was that the board can't just pass a resolution saying we are going to change ambulance staffing, which is what I thought I heard you say earlier,
Not to interrupt, Commissioner, but
yeah.
Mr. Monty here just wrote me a note that it is also significant. The reality, of course, is to follow the ambulance service plan, you would need to get the EMS medical director on board and accept that recommendation and then propose that change to the Board of County Commissioners. So,
right.
And
that's what I had proposed in
there.
December. I followed that policy.
Well, so
and Dr. Ju refused at that time.
Well, and so through the mediation process, and to Dr. Ju's great credit, I'm sure this was not the ideal process that he wanted to use for developing an EMS system. It's certainly not what the legislature intended in ORS 682. But to his great credit, he did come to the table. He did compromise in good faith. And the same with AMR. I mean, we, at the end of this process, we, there was agreement on how we should proceed forward. And we needed to get to that agreement to effectuate the change. So I think whatever the
I think I just heard you say something different earlier that implied that the board had the authority just on its own to change ambulance staffing. That's the only question I've asked right now. So that's incorrect.
That's incorrect.
The board cannot. Okay, that's all I'm asking. Because I thought I heard it differently earlier. That's all I'm asking.
And again, to go back a little bit, I mean, part of the reason why this is complicated is AMR signed the 5-year extension for the underlying contract and then began to advocate for this change to 1-in-1. So because that contract had already been signed and we were committed to the dual paramedic, because the ambulance service plan has the dual paramedic, and because our county code has the dual paramedic, we had to address each of those. And so through this process, we were able to follow the ambulance service plan to get the EMS medical director on board with this temporary staffing change. And then now he can come back, because now there's agreement to the contract, he can come back and make that recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners. So the reason why some of this stuff is complicated is just because the process is not in lockstep with the procurement cycle, and it's not in lockstep with ORS 682, which the legislature intended a very different process with the ASP to actually develop these types of staffing models. So we're outside of that process, and that's what's made it a little complicated.
So just because you brought these two things up, and I really want to just get to the talking points, but because this process actually is more complicated than I think was conveyed earlier. The major anomalies and the surge, the problems with the paramedic shortage and the challenge with ambulance response times occurred after the contract was signed. And so that was it's kind of a moot point. If the thing happens after the contract signed, you can't be held accountable for like doing it beforehand. And so I don't believe that is AMR signed just saying that's, I think, something misrepresented quite often. And as a board member at the time, the renewal was, or the reprocurement happened, I believe there was a material misstatement to this